strike up.
Hi, this is James Devine with the Music Ed Podcast. Hey, I'd love to send you my free training, 7 tips to save 5 hours this week and every week. If you'd like to receive that, send me an email at jamesthedivine@gmail.com. Also, if your music event needs professional development or speaker, get in touch with me. I'd love to help out. Enjoy the podcast.
Where you get quick and easy tips on how to be a better band teacher.
I am not sure why this is true, but in my 25 years of teaching, the flute section has often been the best section. It doesn't mean every single player in the flute section, but in general, my strongest players seem to be the flute players. And this seems to be true even in like all city band, because the flute auditions are the hardest ones to do, not because they're bad players, but because there are so many good ones. It's like, how do we select the top 6 or the top 8? Here's some tips for teaching flute players. When they're putting their instrument together, make sure they line up their tone hole with the first key. As they're sitting, make sure that their foot joints are behind the player sitting next to them. Nothing worse than a foot joint stuck in the eye. Have the beginners use lots of air. It's normal for beginning players to get lightheaded. That's going to happen, especially if they're using the proper amount of air. And you can start teaching them from the start to have a smaller aperture, which is the opening in their lip. And I like to tell them that it's like a stream of water. The fast water happens where the rocks are lining the banks, because the water has to go through a smaller opening, and that makes it faster. So that as they get used to that, that's going to help them to not get lightheaded. If they do get lightheaded, I just tell them take a couple of minutes to slowly breathe in and out, and then join us back after that. For the second and third octave, have them think of the angle of the airstream. I like to exaggerate. Part of it is being Italian, and part of it is getting the point across to middle schoolers. I tell them the low notes, you're like aiming your air down into the flute. And for the higher notes, you're doing faster air across the top of the flute. And 90% of the time when I have them think about that and give me some faster air, they're able to get the higher notes when they start working on those. If there's no sound, or if you can tell that the student's fingers are correct, then check for a detached spring. This seems to happen a lot on the flutes for me, and when I'm dumbfounded and it's like, what is going wrong with their flute? What did they do to their flute? That's actually what my first thought is. I don't say it out loud, but that's my thought. But then it ends up just being as simple as a spring that has detached from its normal spot. And there seem to be 2 or 3 that are the ones that are the most troublesome. Thumb B flat works better for tuning and should be taught to the students. Going back to the fingers and the sound, I often have the beginning players not quite sure how to put their fingers down. So the thing that I tell them is skip down, down. And so they're skipping that first button on their flute and pushing the second one down. Then they skip the third one and push the fourth one down, and then the fifth one down for example, for the G. So once again, that's a skip, down, down. And after saying that for about 2 months, then the flute players end up getting that working pretty well. Make sure to have them arch their fingers and keep their fingers close to the keys. They should form a C with their right hand. It should look like a backwards C to them if they're holding their hand and fingers properly. Students with large lips or teardrop lips may have a hard time producing a good tone. So if that's the case and you work with them, don't make the mistake I did my first year of teaching. I had a student who I had on flute for the entire first semester, and she wasn't getting a sound. She was a very dedicated hard worker and was trying her best, and she knew all the notes and how to play them, but no sound was really coming out. And I switched her to clarinet, and she ended up being one of my top students. So don't make the mistake I did and wait too long to switch a student from flute if it's not working out. In fact, I would say with flute, if they're not able to get a sound out pretty shortly with a little bit of coaching, then they're probably not going to get a sound out of flute anytime. I struggle with flute. I'm not very good at flute. I can play a little bit on it. What I have found this year, what I used was those Jupiter beginning band kits, and it has helped me tremendously. For the first 2 weeks, I just have all the students playing on their own mouthpiece that comes in this kit they're about $40 each, and it's got a flute head joint, a clarinet/sax mouthpiece, a trumpet mouthpiece, and a baritone mouthpiece. And we all learn how to blow properly in all of them. And then after about a week, I start testing them on these mouthpieces and figure out which one they're going to work on. I found it to be very effective, especially for figuring out who's not going to work on flute. I hope that these tips have been helpful to you.
The Music and Podcast, where you get quick and easy tips for how to be a better band.